What's going on, everybody? Welcome into another mock draft. Now, there's a lot more information to be had in this mock draft compared to the first two that I dropped, as the draft combine is done and we have a little bit more intel on each prospect, as well as some potential landing spots for certain guys. I've also done some more research on some of these prospects, and I feel like I'm starting to have a good grasp for a lot of second round prospects, and I'm excited to talk about those. Now, before we jump into the video, subscribe if you haven't already and leave a like on this video. It really helps me out. These videos tend to blow up a little bit more than my other stuff, so definitely help me out. Hit that like button. And then I've had people ask me, why don't you put highlights on? Or you should put highlights. Highlights. I don't do highlights on this channel. I don't mess with copyrighted stuff like that. Anybody that does do highlights on their channel either just takes the copyright claim or they have ways around the copyright system. And I'm just not going to mess with that. That's something I decided with this channel a while ago. That's why you have all the cool graphics instead. This mock draft is just for me to go rapid fire on some draft prospects and some landing spots, and for you to compare your own opinions and your own thoughts to what I have to say in the video. What are your thoughts? Let me know down in the comment section below as I go through these. And then there's also some great channels out there to view film breakdown and that sort of thing, so you can get a better feel for some of these prospects. So without further ado, let's jump into the #1 overall pick, which is going to be made by the Orlando Magic, the winners of the draft lottery. And they're rumored to be looking at Jabari Smith with this first overall pick. I like Chet Holmgren for them. Part of me as a Gonzaga fan wants to see Chet Holmgren reunite with his high school teammate in Orlando with Jalen Suggs, but it sounds like Orlando is targeting Jabari Smith. It sounds like they are potentially looking to move off Mo Bamba in this year's free agency. He is a restricted free agent, but it looks like Orlando is targeting a power forward center duo of Jabari Smith and Wendell Carter Jr., which is pretty intriguing, I must say. Let's jump into the second overall pick, which is the Oklahoma City Thunder selecting Chet Holmgren out of Gonzaga. I think that Chet doesn't fall out of the top 2 in this draft. I think if he's there at 2, he makes a lot of sense for OKC. They could use some more floor spacing for SGA, for Josh Giddey, and they could use some defense. And Chet Holmgren provides both of those, and he could potentially play next to Poku, or, you know, once he bulks up a little bit, Chet could play some center. You have some intriguing lineup possibilities with Chet there at number 2 in OKC. At number 3, the Houston Rockets, I think, are just going to take whichever one of the power forwards are left, which means they select Paolo Banchero out of Duke. He's a solid playmaker. They could use a little bit more playmaking, in my opinion. I'm not a huge fan of Kevin Porter Jr. there long term. I think Banchero would have a chance to become maybe the main facilitator there in Houston if he can develop properly. I think Houston needs to trade Christian Wood. I'm waiting on that to happen for them, but I think with them getting the 3rd overall pick, I think a Christian Wood trade is going to happen. Christian Wood, I think, is better at center, but you got Sengun, and then if you got Banchero there at the 4, I think it just makes a ton of sense to trade out Christian Wood. With the 4th overall pick, the Sacramento Kings end up selecting Jaden Ivey, the guard out of Purdue. This is an intriguing spot for Sacramento. They are an interesting team at number 4. They traded out Tyrese Halliburton for Domantas Sabonis. I didn't like that trade, but it left a hole at the shooting guard position, and Jaden Ivey could make some sense. Now, the shooting with a Jaden Ivey, De'Aaron Fox backcourt is very, very questionable. However, in terms of just outright speed, it's the fastest backcourt in the NBA, bar none. Those two guys can just grab the ball and go and are a blur in transition, and it would be fun to watch those two guys in the backcourt together there in Sacramento. There's rumors that this could be a Keegan Murray or maybe a surprise pick here at 4. I still think there's a chance that maybe Dyson Daniels can get all the way up here to 4, but I think in the end, Sacramento needs to just go with Jaden Ivey. Go with the best prospect on the board. Don't be the Kings. Don't do another Kings thing. Just pick the obvious consensus pick. And then if this doesn't pan out, then you could say, well, everybody would have taken Jaden Ivey at number 4. It's not because we're the Kings or anything. Anyway, jumping into number 5, the Detroit Pistons select Shaedon Sharpe, the wing out of Kentucky. There are some concerns bubbling around the draft combine, considering he didn't measure his athleticism, and scouts apparently wanted to see him play in the combine scrimmages, which I don't really understand. So I don't agree with some of the concerns around him and some of the red flags that people have been bringing up as of late. We've all known that he hasn't played much at a high level and doesn't have a ton of high-level game film on him. That's been said for a while now. The one thing from the combine that we didn't know was how tall he was. He was reported 6'6" without shoes with a 7-foot wingspan. Instead, he's 6'4", so I think that might knock him down a little bit. But I think at this point, Detroit just needs to go with the highest upside prospect on the board, a boomer bust guy. They got unlucky by falling to 5, but they can make up for that if Shaedon Sharpe pans out. Now, let's look at the number 6th overall pick, which is the Indiana Pacers selecting Dyson Daniels, who is one of my draft sleepers, and he has risen quite a ton lately. There's rumors that he has a promise in the top 10, and if he has a promise, I would venture to guess it would be here at 6 to Indiana. It could be at 8 to New Orleans. They could use maybe another playmaker. He's a solid fit there in a backcourt with CJ McCollum, but I have a feeling it's Indiana. They gave Chris Duarte a promise last year, if I recall correctly. Chris Duarte had an early promise in the draft process, and Golden State wanted him at 14. Indiana ended up taking him at 13. I think Dyson Daniels does probably have a promise. The rumors last year around Chris Duarte did seem to be true. So if Dyson Daniels has a promise, 6 to Indiana, you could put him in a backcourt with Tyrese Halliburton, and assuming Dyson Daniels is shooting at the combine, which was really, really good, and assuming that's legit, he and Halliburton can both play with the ball and play off each other, so that would be an intriguing, pretty big-sized backcourt there going forward in Indiana. I think this offseason they need to trade Malcolm Brogdon. At 7, you have the Portland Trailblazers selecting BENNEDICT MATHURIN, the wing out of Arizona. He measured well at the combine, 8'8", standing reach, has the size to play the 3, which means he makes more sense for Portland. They need to address both their starting forward spots this offseason, and this pick needs to address one of them, and they do that here with BENNEDICT MATHURIN, a 3 and D guy who has a pretty high floor in my opinion, because those two traits are very, very good to have in a wing in the NBA. He's probably the best movement shooter in the league, can fly off of screens, can fly off of pin downs, catch and shoot on the move, and then I think he has some off the dribble upside. His float game looks solid, has shown some passing flashes, so a high floor guy with a higher ceiling than you might expect makes a ton of sense to bring into Portland as a small forward. At number 8, the New Orleans Pelicans select Keegan Murray, the forward out of Iowa. Positionally, this might not make a ton of sense. They got Zion Williamson, they got Herb Jones, they got Brandon Ingram, but I think Brandon Ingram can slide down and play some 2. I think Herb Jones and Zion Williamson can play some small ball 5. I think you have enough positional versatility with those 3 guys to be able to slot Keegan Murray into the lineup and find him some minutes, and with Zion Williamson's health issues, it could be beneficial to have another forward there in the lineup. So I just have New Orleans going with the highest value guy here, but if Keegan Murray doesn't get taken top 7, there's a chance that he could fall to 10, 11. There's a chance that New Orleans would just want to go with a guard here like a Johnny Davis. I don't really know. I don't think Keegan Murray will fall though, so this is kind of my weird landing spot for him. At number 9, the San Antonio Spurs select Jeremy Sochan, the forward out of Baylor. There's rumors that Sochan has a draft promise, and if I had to guess, it would be San Antonio. They need a forward, and they've done a good job developing some raw defensive forwards on the offensive end of the ball, and Sochan has some ball handling abilities, some playmaking flashes that he's shown, and catch and shoot wise he was okay last year at Baylor. I believe he was 36% on catch and shoot threes, so if he has a draft promise, I could see it being number 9 to San Antonio, given that they could use some forward help long term. At number 10, I have the Washington Wizards selecting Jalen Duren, the center out of Memphis. I think this would probably be the best player left at this point on the board, except for maybe a Johnny Davis, but Johnny Davis and Bradley Beal, do those two guys fit? I don't know. So I have the Wizards going with Duren. They could use a center. Duren next to Porzingis is kind of intriguing, and I like Duren as a value pick here at 10 for the Washington Wizards, who I think Bradley Beal stays, but you never know. They are in a weird position with their team right now. Anyway, at number 11, the New York Knicks select Johnny Davis. Great value pick for them. A guy who measured better than I thought at the combine, has the size to play some 3 and be competitive at that position, so you can pair him next to an RJ Barrett, and Johnny Davis has that on-ball point of attack defensive ability to be able to guard the best 2 or the best 3 or the best point guard in the starting lineup should he play well enough to earn a starting role. And then, you know, you can play RJ Barrett more off the ball defensively, which I think makes more sense. Johnny Davis would be a Tom Thibodeau type of rookie that maybe he'd actually play, and I think he's the best value at this point on the board. At number 12, the Oklahoma City Thunder select AJ Griffin from Duke, who has fallen down lately, given some medical questions that we already kind of knew. He dealt with a knee injury heading into college and hasn't regained his high school athleticism. He obviously can shoot the ball, but everything else is a bit of a question mark, especially defensively. And then he didn't measure at the draft combine. This was the guy I wanted to measure the most at the draft combine because he has a really long wingspan reportedly, but he has extremely low shoulders. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just go look up a picture of him. He has very low shoulders. So I wanted to see what his standing reach was. He didn't measure. I think he might be a little bit undersized at the small forward position, and if he's just a guy who's a shooter, he could fit in OKC because you got some size there with Josh Giddey, who's kind of a point forward. Gilgeous-Alexander has some solid size for a guard, so you could slot AJ Griffin in as a shooter to play off those guys and then see if he develops elsewhere. And this is OKC's second pick in the draft, so they can take a risk on some of the red flags that AJ Griffin presents. Anyway, with pick number 13, the Charlotte Hornets select Mark Williams, the center out of Duke, who had crazy measurables at the draft combine. 9'9" standing reach. This dude could probably touch the rim standing on his toes. Charlotte needs a center. I think Jalen Duren makes more sense for them because they like to play at more of an up-tempo speed, and Jalen Duren fits that a little bit better, but a lob target like a Mark Williams for LaMelo Ball would be it would work. It would absolutely work. And then defensively, obviously can protect the rim with that length. Mark Williams would be a really solid fit here at 13 to Charlotte. I think if Jalen Duren and Mark Williams are both on the board at 13 and they don't really have a preference, then I think they would wait until pick number 15 to go center, considering one of those two guys would be guaranteed on the board and they could make sure that they get somebody else that they like at this 13th pick. At 14, the Cleveland Cavaliers select Malachi Branham, the guard out of Ohio State. This is my favorite fit for Branham at this point in the draft. He stays in Ohio. I don't know where he grew up, but went to college at Ohio State, stays in Ohio, going to Cleveland. Makes sense as a starting backcourt mate long-term next to Darius Garland. I think Cleveland needs to move off Colin Sexton. I think they need to find a long-term starting two-guard that can score and play some defense and do some things offensively, and I think that is Malachi Branham here at 14 for Cleveland. At 15, I have the Charlotte Hornets selecting Ousmane Dieng, the forward out of France. Charlotte is pretty set in the backcourt right now. They took Book Knight with the 11th pick in last year's NBA draft, so they could use some forward depth, in my opinion. Ousmane Dieng would be an interesting fit, and I think is the highest, maybe the highest upside prospect left on the board at this point in the draft, and one of the best value picks at this spot. At 16, the Atlanta Hawks select Ochai Agbaji. This is a pretty popular pick, in my opinion. Could make sense long-term as the starting shooting guard next to Trae Young, and just a solid high-floor pick. I don't really know what his ceiling is. I think he's going to be a guy who knocks down threes and plays some solid defense and can maybe do a little bit off the dribble, but is mostly just going to be a 3-and-D guy. And that makes sense next to a Trae Young at 16 here to Atlanta. At 17, the Houston Rockets select Tari Eason, the forward at LSU, who has Kawhi Leonard-esque hand measurements and wingspan and can obviously play good defense. He's very right-hand dominant and has some question marks with his shot and just his overall offensive game. But after taking Paolo Banchero with the 3rd pick, and you have Alperen Sengun, who's an offensively gifted big man, and you have Jalen Green as well, I think it would make sense for Houston to take arguably the best defender left on the board at this point, and therefore I have them taking Tari Eason. At 18, the Chicago Bulls select Nikola Jovic, the forward out of Serbia, another guy who measured well at the NBA draft combine with he was 6'11" without shoes, or 6'10", something like that. 9-foot standing reach, has the length to play the power forward position, needs to get a little bit stronger, but a guy who is gifted on the perimeter. I think he could play 3 positions offensively. I think you could even fit him in as a 2 guard on the offensive end. Question marks defensively, but if he's able to bulk up and play some power forward, I think that might be his best defensive position. And Chicago could go for a little bit of wing/forward depth, and going for Jovic I think makes a lot of sense here at 18 for the Bulls. At 19, the Minnesota Timberwolves select Jake LaRavia out of Wake Forest. This is a guy who's risen a ton lately, and I think there's a solid chance that he rises into the top 20 because he's a 3-and-D guy that can also handle the ball a bit and play make a bit. He has a high floor, given the fact that he can knock down shots. His steals plus blocks numbers were really good in college, and most players with his statistical profile defensively in college pan out on that end and end up being good defenders. He's 6'8". I think he can play either forward position, and he would make a ton of sense long term for the Minnesota Timberwolves, and it could help them defensively, provide some more shooting around Cat and D'Angelo Russell and Anthony Edwards. And I think he would be a guy that could, honestly, if he ended up in Minnesota or a team where he could play, he could be a guy that could make an all-rookie team. At 20, I have the San Antonio Spurs selecting E.J. Liddell, the forward out of Ohio State. The Spurs took Sohan at 9. They continue to stock up on power forward depth. E.J. Liddell here makes some sense. He did not measure well at the combine. He's definitely an undersized 4, but he makes up for that with quick jumping ability and a solid overall offensive game, and he's the type of player I could see the Spurs taking a liking to. At 21, I have the Denver Nuggets selecting MARJON BEAUCHAMP, the forward from the G League Ignite. Denver needs an on-ball defender. BEAUCHAMP could be one of the best on-ball defenders out of this draft, and offensively I think he has a little bit more upside than some people give him credit for. Shooting form looks solid. He just has to consistently knock down shots, which he hasn't really been able to prove yet. But if he can develop his shot more and be a guy who learns how to play off of Nikola Jokic, I could see him becoming potentially a starter long term, because Denver needs a guy who can play some on-ball defense in their starting lineup. And MARJON BEAUCHAMP, I think, could guard potentially 4 positions. He has an 8'10" standing reach, so I think he can guard some power forwards in the NBA, and I think he can definitely guard 1 through 3. At 22, I have the Memphis Grizzlies selecting Leonard Miller, the unknown forward out of Canada, who did not play college basketball, came out a year earlier than people expected, one of the youngest players in the draft. He did not measure as well as I thought he was in the draft combine. I was previously saying that I don't think he falls past 20 simply because the team's going to fall in love with his upside, but I think Memphis at 22 is a good landing spot for him. Memphis has a ton of depth, so they don't need to take a guy who's ready to play right away. I think they're in position with both their first round picks to just swing for some upside. I think at least one of those picks will just be an upside home run swing. If he ends up being a bust, oh well, we have a ton of depth already, so that's fine. But Leonard Miller is a type of guy that fits that profile in terms of somebody that might not really amount to anything, definitely a boom or bust prospect, but given his offensive skill set and some of his passing ability at 6'9", he's a really intriguing prospect. He's going to need a few years to develop, but Memphis is in position to not have to pressure him into playing earlier than he needs to, and Memphis has shown that they know how to develop players. So I like Leonard Miller 22 to Memphis. At 23, I have the Brooklyn Nets, and this could be the Philadelphia 76ers if Brooklyn elects to have their 2023 first round pick instead. Brooklyn gets a choice of this pick or Philadelphia's 2023 pick, and the rumors are that Brooklyn's going to elect to give this pick to Philadelphia so they can get their 2023 first. But until that happens, I'm just going to put Brooklyn up here, and with this pick, I have the Nets selecting Ty Washington, the guard at Kentucky. I think Ty Washington makes sense for both the Sixers and the Nets, just as potentially a third guard behind Maxey and Harden, or a third guard behind, a Bruce Brown and Kyrie Irving. And there's question marks about Kyrie Irving, so I think Ty Washington actually makes a little bit more sense for Brooklyn. But Washington's a guy I could see fall into the second round that surprises people. I don't really know what to make of his game or his draft stock. Therefore, I'm going to have him going 23 to a team who I don't know who has this pick. At 24, I have the Milwaukee Bucks selecting Jalen Williams, the wing out of Santa Clara, who's a late riser in this draft prospect, a guy who I've taken a liking to. He has definite small forward size, a 7'2" wingspan, an 8'9.5" standing reach, and he can handle the ball, he can pass and play make, he can score from all three levels, and I think he fits in really well in Milwaukee. He actually reminds me a lot of a Chris Middleton, so getting a Chris Middleton clone off the bench in case Chris Middleton gets hurt again makes a lot of sense, I think. At 25, I have the Spurs selecting Ismail Kamagate. I've had this pick in all three of my mock drafts. If you want to know more about what I think of him for the Spurs, watch one of those mock drafts back. But basically, the Spurs have 4 picks in this draft. They could use a draft and stash guy, and they could use some more center depth. So I have them going with Kamagate. At 26, I have the Dallas Mavericks selecting Blake Wesley, the guard out of Notre Dame, a guy who has a really nice looking mid-range pull-up, can score the ball, crafty with the ball off the dribble, and has solid size. I think he has the size to play the 2 or the 3, and I think he could be a long-term Tim Hardaway replacement on a much cheaper contract, which might allow Dallas to do some other things with their roster to improve it around Luka Doncic. So Blake Wesley is the pick at 26. At 27, I have the Miami Heat selecting Kennedy Chandler. I've also had this pick in all 3 of my mock drafts. I think Kennedy Chandler makes a lot of sense for the Heat. I think he's underrated in this draft process. I have him as a borderline top 20 prospect, but a lot of the teams ahead of this pick don't really need a long-term point guard, and the one team that might is Brooklyn. Ty Washington on the board. I think they select Ty Washington over a Kennedy Chandler, so that's why Kennedy Chandler has been falling in my mock drafts compared to where I have him on my big board, but I like him as a potential long-term Kyle Lowry replacement for the Miami Heat. At 28, I have the Golden State Warriors selecting Dalen Terry, the supersized guard out of Arizona, 6'6", and can play make, can pass, can handle the ball, and I think Golden State could elect to take him and hope that he grows into that role that Sean Livingston used to fill as that 6'6", 6'7" guard that can pass and attack the rim a little bit. I still need to do a little bit more research on Dalen Terry. He just screams Golden State Warriors pick to me. At 29, the Memphis Grizzlies select Kendall Brown, the forward out of Baylor. This is another bit of a high upside pick. It's a little bit different. Kendall Brown is a more known quantity than a Leonard Miller at 22, and he plays good defense and is athletic, but on top of that, he doesn't really have much redeeming value at this point. But if he can develop into a better shooter and he has some playmaking potential, then I could see this being a steal at 29 for Memphis. And then the final pick of the first round at 30 of the Oklahoma City Thunder selecting Caleb Houston, the forward out of Michigan. There's whispers that Caleb Houston has a promise at 30 from OKC, and I guess this could make some sense as a forward shooter. They took AJ Griffin at 12, and they took Chet Holmgren at 2, and getting more shooting here at 30, I guess could make some sense if they're really trying to space the floor for SGA and Josh Giddey. I don't like giving a Caleb Houston a promise. I know he was a top 10 prospect in last year's high school class, but he didn't show much at Michigan, struggled. Basically, he can shoot the ball, but outside of that, I'm unsure whether he's going to be able to do anything else well at the NBA level. But given the whispers, I have OKC taking Caleb Houston here at 30. Now, let's take a look at the second round. Peyton Watson's been a riser as a high upside guy who didn't get a ton of playing time last year at UCLA. Gabriel Procida, the wing from Italy, is a guy that I've taken a liking to, and with the Magic having 3 picks in this year's draft, I think they could select him with 32 or 35. Dominic Barlow also rising, kind of an unknown quantity, but a high upside guy, it seems like, so OKC is the perfect team to just take a bunch of swings over the next few years on boomer bust type prospects, and if a couple of them pan out, then OKC's pretty much set. Koloko I have fallen to 36. I like him a lot more than that, but a lot of mock drafts have him slipping, and I think he would be a steal at 36 for Portland. Same thing with Bryce McGowan's at 37 to Sacramento, is a guy who has the size to play some small forward. I think he's going to need a couple years to be a piece that helps an NBA team, but upside wise, a pretty good upside pick there at 37 for the Kings. I really like a lot of the second round depth. I like a lot of these prospects listed here in this second round, and there's going to be guys that slip that people don't expect. I have no idea who those guys are going to be, but there was a number of guys in the second round that I felt like I was putting too low, but I can't put everybody where I think they belong to go, and I think this is a really deep draft in terms of high floor guys. Therefore, I have some guys slipping, but Andrew Nembhard's been rising lately. I think he would make sense as a third guard in Cleveland behind a Malachi Branham and Darius Garland. He could kind of replace that Ricky Rubio role, I think. Walker Kessler has been slipping, and he goes 46 to Detroit. Jalen Williams, 49, I think is another really good value pick for Sacramento as a guy with more upside than people think. Patrick Baldwin Jr., I think, is going to slip into the latter half of the second round. He goes 53 to the Boston Celtics. Wendell Moore, I have going 59 to the Blazers. Ignore that number mistake with 57. The forfeited picks have been throwing me for a loop, but Wendell Moore Jr. is one of those guys where I feel like he's going way too low, but I mean, if I move him up, then I have to move somebody else down, and with numerous teams having multiple second round picks, I think you're going to see more international guys go in the second round than you might expect. So the Spurs at 38, the Timberwolves at 48 and 50, and they also have 40. The Warriors have 3 picks in this draft. The Kings have 3 picks in this draft, so I think you're going to see some maybe unknown international guys go here in the second round that knocks a guy like a Wendell Moore Jr. down possibly to the end of the draft. Same thing with like a Harrison Ingram or a Justin Lewis or even a Max Christie, who I have going 60 to Indiana. That's not a knock on their draft stock by any means. It's just sometimes that's how the draft plays out, and it's played out in the past. Lou Dort ended up going undrafted when he was a borderline first-round pick in mock drafts leading up to that draft, and he's ended up proving that he probably should have been a first-round pick in that draft, but every year there's just guys who slip that you don't expect. Anyway, that wraps up Mock Draft 2.0. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. As I said at the beginning of the video, subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that like button. And with that being said, I'm out of here. I'll catch you in the next one. Until then, as always, peace out. Go Blazers.